Thank you. I have to apologize for not actually showing up the last time this lecture was scheduled. And just to warn you, I still have a little bit of a congestion voice issue. So that's where this comes in. If I have to stop, you'll probably notice. So again, thank you for the invitation to not only serve as the Portman jury chair, but also to visit your studios today, where some really interesting work was being done and great conversations. I was intrigued with the Ellen's request to turn this lecture into a question, and so I have to say I had a little bit of a problem with it initially. Initially it's like this great idea, and then I go, oh wait, now I got to do this, and so I thought, well, the best thing I can do is borrow a question. So let me show you a few images of the office, and I'll move into the question itself and my great theft of a question. So our studio is in Minneapolis. We're on the 24th floor of an older building. These are operable windows, which is makes it kind of breezy with an updraft. And the office is really built around a combination of a very collaborative model and a very productive model. We have all of the desks are sort of in the periphery, and all of the collaborative tables are in the center. And what's interesting about it is this fluctuation back and forth between really heads down productive work and intensely collaborative discourse and conversation. And for us, it's always been interesting to have people that are very engaged and really seeking excellence in the profession, but also assuming that people should give their best while they're at the office and then take a break and go home. And so this is something that I've said frequently, and it's sometimes the most memorable part of the lecture, so here it comes. That an 8-hour day is not a bad idea. And I've seen research where they're finding that we're really only productive for about 6 hours out of the day. So the whole architectural culture that's built around 12 and 18-hour days, I think, is a false sense of productivity. So we have a lot of young architects in the studio that have families, and we like them to stay acquainted with their children, as well as stay productive while we're in the office. So this idea of having heads down time to actually produce your work, but still having a good amount of discourse. And I don't know why I look like I have a headache at the end of the office in this image, but it probably has something to do with something that I'm rifling through. So this is the Big Baroque Question, and I have to admit borrowing this from Rafael Mineo, who taught a really amazing lecture class at the GSD, which I did not attend. I was teaching there and then sort of sneaking in to catch his lectures whenever I had an opportunity to do so. And his question was how he was lecturing on a number of different architects, and he would select a specific building, and then he would ask the question, how did this architect proceed into architecture? And so this idea, I think, is very cogent, and I think it's, I have to say, in my practice, the trajectory of the practice has changed in how we answer this question. And I think we've really been able to build a practice on reframing this question as we do our projects. So how to proceed into architecture is, for me, really about this cusp between the research that you do prior to the project and the first acts of design. And for years, we've talked about this sort of research phase as being the most important phase of our work. And it's the phase in which we really begin to understand both the context of the project, the sort of physical context, urban or landscape context, as well as the program of the project, both the functional and aspirational sides of the project. So we've literally taken this to be very specific around those two ideas. At the same time, we've found that our ideas of the context of architecture have been radically changing in recent years. And that context is, as we know it, in terms of landscape and sort of the physical context, is now changing into an understanding of a social context, a cultural context, an economic and political and sustainable context. So we really begin to see the demand for architecture performance expanding along with that expanded context of our projects. We also see a greater and greater demand for programmatic reinvention. In other words, taking our clients' typical strategies for operational strategies within their business or lives in their residences or learning in schools to be to really changed by the building itself, so that we really look at innovation as a programmatic issue and an issue that architecture can directly affect. So going back to this question of how do we translate from research into design, I think for us it's always the idea that you would quiet your voice, you know, your strategies, your drawing, your jumping to solutions during the research phase. And then as this sort of research piles up, you sort of get this sort of pressure to begin to design as you've been able to define the project context. And I think at that moment there's this sort of click where you just kind of have to fall into a design mode. But I have to say that line moves back and forth between design and research. So as we begin to start to make our first ideas clear, we begin to pose more questions about the context of the project or the programmatic requirements of the project. And so we're constantly moving back and forth, I think, between the idea of constraints and rules. This is also a borrowed concept, although I've reversed it. This is a name of a book, Manzanilla Tunion, and the idea of the project delivering constraints and the architects creating rules that would further develop the design of the project. And that clarity around which we make rules is, for me, the most vivid way that we begin to see our work. So I'm going to jump into some projects, and what I'd like to do is set up some sort of context with drawings and images of sites. This is not exactly a site, but very close to one. And then proceed into the design. In some cases, I'm showing unbuilt work, so you will never see the design other than renders. So this is a project that we did quite a while ago. It was our first residential project, and it was on the Bay of Fundy, which has this sort of enormous tidal swing. So not only is there this sort of threatening sort of marine landscape, but there's also these swings of maybe 30 feet of tidal change over the course of a day. This was the site. It's an old image, and it's gotten like really weird in terms of color. The Atlantic water is not quite that color. And the site where we ended up building is right in here. This you can see is at low tide, and high tide would be, well, somewhere up in here. So it's quite an extraordinary place. Here again you see the owners bought 57 acres and a mile of coastline in New Brunswick, Canada, which is where the Bay of Fundy is located. And you can see very much of the landscape is this sort of really interesting sort of low-growing plants and a few trees. And that plant material is almost just a carpet across the granite rock. And so it's an incredibly powerful landscape. It's an incredibly threatening landscape in a storm, and just a very powerful experience to be on this site. This, of course, is summer. So this is the site plan, and you can see the sort of craggy coast where this is just this little inlet bay. Sorry, I can do this. So this is where you saw that little inlet. We didn't get all the topography in there. And then this line here would be the line of the vegetation. And so basically, to excavate the site, that little mat of plant material was just rolled back, and then we were on competent rock. And it's obviously quite expensive to blast in this area, so we wanted the house to have a minimal effect on that rocky landscape. So it sits as sort of two bars. I remember doing this when I was on the site with the owner, like, well, we'll just have this bar floating over this bar. And the idea was to give this west-facing porch for the upper bedroom area. And this is where David was going to smoke his cigars. And then this sort of east-facing dining area and this two-story living room in between. And what was interesting, I think, that forced this piece was this incredibly intense and steep topography. So the idea of being on this site was, or sort of resting on that site comfortably, required this grade change. So the building is basically, as I say, 2 stories. There is some excavation in this area here, but otherwise everything else is pretty much on grade on the upper level, west side, and on piers for the rest of the building. And then the programmatic piece of this, and I think I'm going to show 3 houses. All 3 houses are of the same type. They're all retreat houses, and they're all about reinventing your life in a place that you resonate with. So these are people that have bought pieces of land for a particular reason, because there's just, it speaks to them in some way. And the idea is they're not looking for their normal daily life on that space. So it's about creating a different kind of life, a sort of what I called on this house a sort of anti-functional life. In other words, you have this entry door here. The kitchen is just 2 low bars here. There's nothing that would interrupt your connection to that landscape. Above it, you come in and you turn, and then there was this very intentional idea of coming in, turning around, and then coming back, so that you have this frame of the stair framing what they call in Maine the bold ocean beyond, and then the upper bedroom, and then tucked below, past the living room, is the upper bedroom, and then the bedroom down below here is the guest bedroom. So the house was really sort of programmatically inefficient. It wasn't about creating very efficient spaces, or it was about always reminding yourself, and as you go through the rituals of everyday life, that you're in this place. And so here it is. We talk about it as this sort of tiny building in this large landscape. It was published in a German magazine in which the writers talked about the mutual intensification of site and architecture, and the idea that there was this dialogue between the site and the architecture itself. So they're mutually intensifying one another. there was an intentional idea of putting this sort of mass wall construction in the back, and then the more fragile structure facing the ocean. So there was this sort of anchoring piece. It wasn't all about exposure, but it was a lot about exposure. We had a structural engineer that stood out there on the deck and said, "Oh, I get what this house is about. It's about the ferry boats," which I thought was, okay, fine. So there you see David having a meal in the dining room, and next to him are the simple bars of the kitchen. So Mary Beth, who is a fantastic chef, was just not about creating elaborate meals here. It was all about this sort of simplicity and just being in this place. Interestingly, it's a marine environment, so you can see some of the bracing below to laterally stabilize the house. Everything had to be stainless steel on the exterior because of the corrosive marine environment. So this is truly a threatening landscape. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. So this is the frame of the ocean as you come up the stairs, and then this sort of steps that bring you down, and sort of seating area that's all about just enjoying the sort of spectacle of the ocean. The glazing system used sort of enormous frames of glass with a suppressed sill and head in order to allow that sort of more expansive view. Is this totally, it's just foreshortened by where I'm standing, correct? The proportions are okay. Okay. Because I'm looking at this screen and that looks completely different. So that's, okay, there we go, that's the wide angle. So this is, you know, again, this sort of sensibility of retreat. Once we did the house for Mary Beth and David, my husband Jack and I thought, well, that was a good idea. But I knew we weren't in for, you know, a 3-hour flight to Boston, another hour and a half to get to Bangor, and then a 2-hour drive after that. So we found a site on Lake Superior in the little town of Schroeder that sort of, as far as Jack is concerned, amplifies our madness in the idea of having 2 houses in Minnesota. You know, why would you, living in Minneapolis, would you do a vacation home north of yourself? So it's a little crazy. And this is sort of the vision of the site, where it's a very rocky, sort of unforgiving landscape coming down to the water. A lot of really stone palisades like you saw in the Kohler house. And then this sort of industrial past. The North Shore of Lake Superior in Minnesota is where a lot of the iron ore is coming out of the Iron Range in northern Minnesota, and it comes to these loading dock facilities, and it's put on these lakers, these huge, they're usually about 1,000 feet long, and depending if they're loaded or not, 50 to 60 feet tall. And so there are these enormous boats. This one is probably maybe a half mile, quarter of a mile from the house itself. And so there are these really powerful, I think, sort of industrial culture up there that I think is not only powerful given the lake, but is also very culturally significant to the sort of identity of people that live in this area. So this is the site plan for the house. It's not 57 acres and a mile of coastline. It's about 2.5 acres, and is gently sloping and then rather radically sloping down to the water. So you can begin to see this. Behind us are the Sawtooth Mountains, and you can see that this is a bit of wetland. Now this is again very, very rocky shoreline. So these wetland areas are very important to catch and retain the melt from the winter snows off the Sawtooth Mountains. I went to school in Colorado. These are not really mountains, but in Minnesota, they're definitely mountains. So we'll go along with that. So this goes into some of the sustainable strategies for the house. This was meant to be very simple living, very direct, not too complicated. So we have, black roof, black floor, that the black roof deflects the summer sun, the black floor absorbs the winter, and really does an amazing job of heating this building in the winter. It's pretty astounding. We have gone up there, we keep the temperature at about 45 degrees while we're not there, and we don't have one of those cool things because there's no internet up there yet. So we have to come in and it's 45 degrees, and if it's a sunny day in the winter, it can be 80 in the house. So that's pretty extraordinary in Minnesota to have that kind of passive heating. If it's not a sunny day, we build a fire really quick. And then we have, for the summer, there's large 4-foot by 10-foot panels of sliding glass. And with the body of water that's probably no more than high 60s in a good year, you have an immediate cooling effect with the winds coming off the water and cooling the house. So this sort of explains sort of the diagram, the idea of the house being a sort of minimal change to the hydrology of the site, so that we're really still allowing a very slow movement of water as it moves down to Lake Superior. Had we built this entire piece down on the ground, there would have been an incredibly large detour as you go to the water, and we wanted to maintain that hydrology, to maintain the plants that were in this front area, in what we call the front yard, which is not a yard at all. So this is the house as you approach, a very sort of calm sense of the main house, and then a gap, and then the studio that frames the water beyond, and a sort of diagonal view toward the end. This is again an attempt to be a little stealthy in this landscape. When you're building a black house in a white landscape, it seems awkward to call it stealthy, but I think the idea of this black is actually kind of powerful in that landscape, and yet not overly out of place. And then the front view, it really shows how much glazing we have facing the water, and then the interior in a very sort of simple way, enormous amount of storage on the north wall that allows us to really sort of remove the detritus of everyday life and put it away, so that when you return to the house, it's quite fresh, and then it gets reinvented with whatever activities are taking place with the new visit. A very, very simple sort of diagram for living. The sort of long table was actually inspired by a visit to a neighbor's house who had a historic cabin that had a long table and then this sort of panoramic glass. And I went up there, this friend of mine's an architect, and he had all of his drawings laid out on that table, and I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to come up here, lay stuff out, and be able to think about it in relative silence. And so that was the idea of building a table parallel to an extraordinary view, a little glimpse of what we really do when we're there. And then the sort of classic combination of this sort of intense fire and then this frozen landscape beyond, which I think it's like this powerful image, of sort of domestic image for me. And then the summer, the sort of early diagram of how the house would sit on the site. And then what I think is actually, this is actually a shot that was taken quite soon after we arrived, which is, it's quite different right now because we had a beaver taking down the trees in the front yard. And so we had to go out and wrap hardware cloth around everything. So this is another retreat. This is a different kind of retreat. This one is probably 45 minutes from Minneapolis, and this is on a lake called Lake Minnetonka, which historically, you can see, well, geographically, it's not a lake. It's a series of well, it's a series of pothole lakes. It's multiple lakes that have been interconnected with channels and drifts, and so you've got really 11 miles of distance on this lake. You can see the dot where the house is. And so this was, back in the day, 1930s, the place that everybody went. There was a streetcar line out there, and you would go out there and you would get on this boat, and that boat would take you from, you know, Minnetonka to Excelsior on the lake, which was, yeah, it was like this idea of the summer cabin. Since then, this is the actual site. Since that time, the residences out here have become more and more permanent, to the point where they are some of the most colossal, in some cases magnificent, in other cases banal, huge houses ever. And so, you know, you have this mix, but what we thought was very interesting was the idea that our clients were interested in going out there, but they really were keeping their house in the city, and this was just to be a time for them to be together with their family. And so we went out there, and there was one of these little cabins. You can see there's a little rope swing. I mean, it was just very casual 1930s thing. And we went out and came to the front door, and you could see right through the house to the water, and we thought that's just a really great way to enter the house. So this became sort of the conceptual basis for the design, where we were looking at, you know, this approach road that would come in here, and then pretty much where the existing house sat, you would come under this piece, and it would frame this view out towards the water. This became sort of a panel of grass, and then the pool was tucked over here. So this was the public bar of the house, an existing garage, an existing sort of guest house, I guess you would call it, over here. And then the public areas were on the first floor and opened out onto that recreation area. And so the idea was to create these interlocking L forms, and that the public area would be on the first level. Up above would be the adults closer to the lake, and then the kids' spaces perpendicular to the lake, and then those were anchored by these sort of pinned stairs. So here's the plan, again, a very, very simple plan, no particular sort of formal quality to it, other than to really allow a sort of sense of coming into the house here. Oops, sorry, there we go. Coming in, so you would approach this way, see this sort of panorama, this portal, turn, and then this became this sort of telescopic view. If this was sort of a frame view, this was more of a telescopic view toward the lake. And then this amazing stair, I'll show you in a second, that really opens up to the sky. So this sort of exchange of views of the house. And then the parents' wing on one side, with the parents quite separate from the two girls' bedroom. So here it is. This is the approach. And then just coming into that courtyard, and this is where all the family activities begin to take place. another shot of that. It was very important to us to render these two L's in different materials. And then the stair, which is, we've got a great video of dropping the stair in sections through the opening in the roof. It's a steel stair with wood tread. And then 2 girls' rooms above, and then a little room off the pool for changing and showering. It's a guest room technically, but it's quite small. And the smaller it got, as the pool equipment room got bigger, they just said, okay, well, great, now they're staying just one day, now they're staying half a day, now they're just here for a couple hours, this is perfect. So it's kind of, they were really cool about it. This is a friend of mine that does extraordinary art and really genius placement, I think, of that piece. I'm looking at the tower. I didn't know I had so many images of this project. Again, keeping everything pretty low so that you're constantly in this environment. And another great wall of storage. This was actually quite a bit deeper than our project. And what's interesting about it is it becomes actually rooms in and of themselves. There's a bar in there, there's a pantry and refrigeration and all of the stuff that is all concealed within that wall, including the fireplace, which is next to the dining area. So this project, I think, that's the end of the houses. But I wanted to show, this is our Atlanta project, except for it's in the Iron Range of northern Minnesota. This is for Delta Airlines. And what was interesting about this project is a very banal building and program, but Delta really wanted to do something different, which I thought was incredible. So we were not going to go after this project at all, but we were convinced by a phone call that we should go after it. And so they basically were challenging architects to help them reinvent this call center in northern Minnesota. And this is one of the most dismal buildings and places to work you've ever seen, but there is a huge unemployment factor in northern Minnesota. So economically, this kind of thing is really a boon to the area. So we were asked to come in and take a look at it and come up with ways to spend $6 million on the building in a way that would count for the people that work there, to be what they called the employer of choice, and to reinforce the brand on the building experience on the interior. So what we thought was that the project really needed to be a blend of the local and the more abstract sort of global company that Delta is. And the idea of really creating a space that connected both the brand and the place was important. So rather than sort of looking at this in a way that was all about the restraints of the project, we immediately said, okay, what would happen if we really created a connection to this landscape that was really powerful, that we could create these sort of miniature gardens that we would cut into the space that would really recreate the North Woods. So we did a series of diagrams that proposed this and sort of sold that to them as a strategy for the building. What we were very concerned about was that even with $6 million, you're not going to get these kind of openings in the building. So we ended up, or a good amount of natural materials in the project. So we ended up doing, they wanted it, but they still wanted to maintain a rather low budget. So we ended up saying, okay, what if we create these as conference rooms? We create these sort of bands of collaborative areas that would be top lit by these a few skylights, and then remove the ceiling and paint everything out, but then use a material, a sort of there's a 3M photographic material that we would surround those conference rooms with a vision of a courtyard or actual photography from the area. So we were creating, in a sense, this sort of simulation of a landscape for the conference rooms. And then we had an idea that we would use a sort of lenticular image as you come into the space, where as you come into work, you see the Delta brand of the sky, and as you leave, I think that's what we did. Yeah, so as you leave, then you see the image of the birch trees and the birch forest that represent the north, the Iron Range area. So here you see the sort of entry space. You see the lenticular wall. Oops, did I move that? No, here it is. See if I can find it. Right, it's right here. So this is as you're coming in and you're moving into the call room floor. And you're seeing just a tiny bit of a conference room beyond. And then we would increase the size of the windows and then plant some landscapes out. Right now, you just looked across turf toward a highway and landscape beyond. And then a more, let's say, connected to the exterior lunchroom area. And again, using steel plate and raw pieces of wood to sort of connect to that space. This is now under construction, and I believe that they're on target for delivering that project in several months. This next project is a project that we're doing with James Corner Field Operations. And for us, it's an incredibly interesting opportunity to work on a completely different scale. If that scale was all about sort of this tiny incursion into a pretty banal structure, this is on the scale of a mile-long street in Minneapolis, Nicollet Mall. And so the idea here was to do this red piece that would connect the Grand Rounds to the Mississippi River. And the idea was to create these landscapes that move through the downtown area with amenities that would spur social activity. And like many city streets, it's mainly an office environment. There are a number of residential buildings that are being built in Minneapolis, but 90% of the city is empty after 5, probably except for this stretch, where there are a good amount of restaurants and activities and theaters. So the idea here was to attract people to come and stay on the mall and to create a more engaged social environment. And so the groves with movable chairs and the ability to sit and talk and run into colleagues and sort of generate more social activity was certainly part of it. But even more important were these ideas of provocations for social interaction. So the idea of a fire pit in the middle of winter in Minneapolis, and the idea that we're crazy hardy. So, people are gonna go out there and sit around and have their coffee out by a fire rather than huddling in a coffee shop is not too far-fetched. And the idea of having, this was a great sort of concept of a reading room where you would have, this giant light fixture and books available. We were looking at doing, our task on the team is not only to sort of interject sort of local knowledge and interest in the project, but also to do all the vertical pieces, which include the transit shelters, which we suggested be dual purpose, so they would be not only transit shelters, but they might be book drops for the library, or they might be bike rehab, bike repair stations, etc. And then in the center of the city are these two stairs that would go up to our skyway levels, and that centerpiece would be a seasonally changing area. So it could be skating and Christmas trees, or here's another one that's sort of the art plinth, the sort of Nicollet Mall, again, the idea of performance or things going on. This is what we call the Crystal Stair, which was a lot about creating just a way of enjoying being in that space. This eventually went away. But the idea, again, of sort of social provocation and creating a social environment was interesting, and was very much at the basis of this second public project, which is a minor league ballpark. This is for the St. Paul Saints, and they are, I think it would be safe to say, they're a very quirky organization. They're run by Mike Veck and his partners, the Gold Claim Group, who are out of New Jersey. They're not the people with a sense of humor, Mike is, and his partner, Bill Murray. So, you know, this is, I think maverick is one of the words that they use to describe themselves. They're all about creating a really community experience at the ballpark. And they have entertainment. These are usher-tainers that come out. This is the Nerd, and they come out and entertain the kids and some of the adults. The project is just outside of a historic district of St. Paul, and at termination of the new transit line. So, oh, I'm sorry, this should have been the opposite direction. I thought I'd turned that. So basically, this is, north is now over here, and this is very distorted, I apologize. I'll just move on. So this is the transit line coming in here. North is over this way, and this is a new bridge that's taking place. And this literally is all parking through here, and then the sort of historic space of Lower Town here. So back in the day, we started doing just, you know, crazy, you know, how would we do a ballpark? I didn't know anything about, you know, the required dimensions, or, you know, anything about, well, I knew how to play the game, that's it. Not how to play the game, but how to watch the game. So we were sort of just kind of doing something so they could get some money from the state legislature. So we did a model, and we did a bunch of diagrams, and literally, in a sense, just giving them a visualization about what something could be there, and very shying away from all of the sort of conventions in baseball, which turned out to be very challenging to some people in the city later. So this is the 5th Street, and the 5th Street would terminate at the front door of the ballpark. In the little image in the corner, you're seeing the Lafayette Bridge, which is being rebuilt as the ballpark is being built. So it's literally between the terminus of 5th Street and the Lafayette Bridge. And the district is very much historic warehouse buildings with sort of lacy steel structures, and then some very quirky kind of businesses that were cropping up around the district, and then these really rather elegant, massive warehouse buildings that for us were intriguing, not necessarily because of the punched openings and the masonry, but as you move to the interior and you begin to see this incredibly robust wood structure with these sort of beautiful steel connectors. So after we had this project, we had the project, and then they assembled a team, a design-build team around it, so we're working with Ryan Companies on this project. They're doing the architect of record, AECom is doing the sports geometry, and we're doing the design. But we had the project, the contract was signed with the city of St. Paul, and it went to the governor, and the governor said, oh, no, you don't, you have to publicly bid this. So we had to stop after programming and do a new presentation, a new pitch for the project. And in that process, we had really come a long way. We'd gone through programming, and we kind of had our ideas about how this thing would go together. So we decided in the interview to present a design. And what we were doing with these little sketches is showing a sort of thinking process for how we were conceiving of the ballpark. So the first conception was thinking about this as literally not just a ballpark, but a park. And so the first idea was to take the area that we were occupying and sort of lay this green carpet over it. And what was happening is there was a very large building that was being taken out, an industrial building, and so there was a 17-foot pretty much hole in the ground when we cleared the site. So what was lovely about it, it allowed us to depress the field so that the top row of the seating bowl is literally at street level. And so you come in and you have this sort of opening up of the ballpark. So the idea of sort of depressing, pushing that playing field down into the earth, and then surrounding that with the few structures that actually comprise a minor league ballpark. It's just not like a 70-foot stadium project, 70,000 person stadium project. This is 7,000 people. So it's maybe 30,000 square feet of building, enclosed building above grade. It's some concessions, and then it's a club room and suites and press box. And then we have a little tiny office building down in the corner here. So this is actually the little tiny office building that actually ended up going below grade. So all of the team rooms, everything was below the seating bowl. So this was the entrance from 5th Street. So you can see it opening right up. You're seeing the sign, basically it opening right into the field itself. The upper concourse as you come in, and the bowl dropping down. And then the craziness of the concourse, which is interesting because it's 360 degrees. So the idea is that you wouldn't spend the entire game sitting in your seat. You would get up, you would walk around, and you can literally do a loop around the ballpark and get just sort of different perspectives. This is above the bullpens in the outfield, and then looking back at the city. When I originally did the project, I wanted to have, home plate out here so you could see the city beyond, but that just didn't work. The sun would get in your eyes. So there's very strict rules about how you do game spaces. And then the sort of night view as you look back. What's interesting about this project is that it had this incredible economic impact, and both this and Nicollet Mall were all about creating this sort of social community. It's about bringing people into the city and creating social engagement. So for us, the idea of public space is very much about this sort of social interaction and engagement with the community. So I'm going to finish with just a few projects that we did for the federal government. This is the land port of entry in Warroad, Minnesota. This is obviously on the Canadian border. It's near Lake of the Woods, and the major industry up there has to do with not only wood pulp, but wood manufacturing. It used to be the place where hockey sticks were made. Remember hockey sticks when they were wood? And there's a huge hockey culture here. And Marvin windows are also made in Warroad, Minnesota. So that idea of the sort of social culture, or sort of the culture of the area being about wood, was interesting, and something that we wanted to use in our development of the project. So this is an early sort of conceptual image, and the idea of taking this idea of the log and the bark on the outside and then this warm heartwood on the inside was a way of providing of having the building represent a warm welcome to the United States if the CBP officers were not doing that themselves, which typically is not part of their job description. They're more about security and protection. So we thought it was an interesting strategy. And it actually came out of the port director asking us, you know, look, I've got this all figured out for you. You really don't have to do much work. We just need a log cabin. And so we thought, well, yeah, probably we're not gonna do that, but interesting idea, and let's see what we can do with it. And the officers are quite happy with it. So here's the sort of conceptual idea of the port being about these cuts, about being this sort of darker skin, and then where you're cutting in, you're seeing that warm heartwood. It's about these sort of simple forms that are inflected to make the easy traffic movements, and to allow better visibility from the officer workroom across the whole site so they can survey the site, and then to create a sort of natural way of mitigating harsh west winds coming onto the site, and creating a rather protected area for port operations in the center here. So this is an existing band of trees, and this is the way we're collecting and then filtering water across the site. So this is a diagram. This is one of the first land ports that uses a geothermal system for heating and cooling, and you know, rainwater collection. Pretty much all of the strategies are employed here. An image of the project across the wetland. This is an incredibly boggy area. I think we had like 80 feet of organics before you hit anything substantive. So it's entirely on piles, and a good amount of the roadways themselves are also on piles. I believe it's about a 10-foot slab for most of the drive lanes, because they were having differential settling on other ports. It's a very interesting project type. Security is obviously a major concern, thus the dense grove of light fixtures. Their requirement was 100 foot candles across the entire port, which is crazy. So it's just too much light. We've slowly, you know, there's a ton of architects that are working on these ports that are slowly building a little bit of common sense into the port operations. It's very hard to make a sustainable building that's putting 100 foot candles across 10 acres. This was another sustainable effort, taking the end pieces from the canopy and then using them for the counter and bench. And then the canopy itself, this is the entrance, the sort of pedestrian entrance. There are almost no pedestrians at this port. I mean, this is 7 miles outside of Warroad and a half mile from the border, just to get some competent soils. And I don't think they've ever had any pedestrians going through this port. Unlike the southern border, where it's largely pedestrian traffic. They do have a lot of motorhomes and boats being dragged through, so the idea of creating very generous turning radiuses, even to the point of doing this kind of treatment between the drive lanes, so that if somebody misses, they're just driving over this sort of shingled slate. This would work with Shane Cohen, landscape architect, who's become just a very intensely collaborative relationship with his office. So this is the port in Buren, Maine. Obviously two separate images, one looking at, from Canada, looking across and seeing the town above, up here. And then this is our site, which was then occupied by rail cars, and then down the bluff to a city park. And then this is obviously the bridge that connects across the St. John River. And then this is just an image of that parkland below. So this was clearly an interesting project, but a very strong cultural basis for this region with the Acadian culture. This is obviously French-based culture, people that are coming and settling in this area. It's a culture that the native northern Mainers are it's pretty much all the St. John Valley, are very proud of. They have these Acadian festivals, they have Acadian weaving, they have Acadian villages about how people used to live. And so here's the potato farming, the weaving with the blankets, and an image of a building from the Acadian village. And so all of these things were kind of part of our sort of research exercise before sort of getting into the park, or the design. This was an early plat map of the town, which we thought was fascinating because it really began to recall the sort of long, thin pieces that you see in around New Orleans and Louisiana toward the Mississippi River. So you begin to see these land divisions that are based on everybody having a piece of the river, which was a connection to the exterior world. And then this sort of powerful image of a sort of forest and sort of warm light beyond. So this was a development of the facade that began with the idea of camouflage and surveillance coming out of sort of this North Woods image, but also a sort of sense of that pattern that's prevalent in the culture with the blankets and the land divisions. And then creating a metal skin that was literally 3 different colors of black. So it had this sort of patinated, elongated image to it. And then the glazing was also a pattern in order to create less of a fishbowl effect for the officers in the evening. So here you can see we literally took this sort of same sort of barcode Fibonacci series and patterned the glass. But then when we put up samples of that in the office, every time you'd walk by, you'd get kind of a little queasy. So, because it kind of had this sort of Ripley effect. And so over that, we overlaid this sort of literal camouflage image. So you could see in this area down here where you can kind of see that camouflage pattern. And so then to create that sort of warm glow, we used a metal panel on the interior, on some of the corridors and interior spaces to provide that warm glow. So an early image of the project, early render of the project. And then again, the sort of slate as a layered slate and planted material. This is planted with blueberries. We thought that was pretty clever for Maine. And then you're seeing the secondary inspections. And then again, the sort of idea of using the site as a way of moving water and moving it in sort of slowly in the sort of pachinko-like action between these berms that recalled the sort of potato farming landforms that were used in that culture. And then that moves into this sort of swale that takes the water down to, this is the berm, which we cleverly called the security berm. So we could argue that it kept cars on the road, which is always, I mean, the Customs and Border Protection do not like port runners. They don't like people going off the road and getting out of town. So the idea of the security berms was a way of arguing that they were a necessary part of the security strategy for the site. And then now we're getting into actual images, the photographs of the site and the building. We were really interested in creating a skin that was quite taut and flush. So the idea of this smooth surface, where we were treating this as a very thin surface that was just about this sort of rule set of the series of alternating metal colors and glazing to sort of create this sort of taut wrapper on the project. And then it really opening up to the main officer work area, where again they need that sort of surveillance of the entire site. And you can see the sort of shaggy berms. The port director was giving a tour, and she was talking about approaching from Canada the site early one morning and having just this incredible image of she had seen the image of the trees with the warm sunrise, sunset, or whatever behind, and she said, "It works." She was like super excited. It's kind of a nice thing, and it's finally, it also dawned on us that for the Warroad project, we were trying to get them to take these license plate readers and portal monitors and paint them black, because we thought, well, that's more secure. People can't see them. It's more stealthy. And they just said, no, we're not going to do that. So we thought in this one, at least with the orange, we had this sort of idea of they work into the design a little bit better. And here you see the main inspection area. So I think that's it. Thank you very much. I can't turn on lights. You're going to have to do that. I don't know if you want to do questions or comments. Is that typical or? Perfect.
Questions?
Comments, thoughts? You guys are tired. You did a whole presentation today.
I'm just curious, no photographs with snow or ice?
Oh, yeah, no, I had them on the house, on Lake Superior.
These border crossings.
Oh, yeah, you know what? We actually were trying to make an argument to General Services Administration that we would need to have them photographed several times in the 4 seasons. And we got to fall and summer, and we just never got back to do a winter shot. But I would totally love to do it, because I think that's, one of the big ideas, particularly for Warroad, was to have this, the port is one story, no matter how you cut it. They're just not big enough to stack, and they need to keep everybody at the ground level, so if there's an issue, they can get out. So in order to give it a presence in that white landscape, we thought black was the way it had to be. And I would love to do that. I actually have a render like that.
So we'd love to see the scale shifts with snowbanks and stuff.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, we went up there, the first walkthrough of the 4 people competing for the project, and it was a blizzard. It was a whiteout. And the idea of actually shooting something in that would just be so terrific. It would be so cool. In fact, Meryl was there. And I was so impressed. It was. Oh, that was with Lori. We were doing a project in Vermilion, South Dakota, and Lori and Henry and Charlie Rose. I can't remember everybody that was on that. And so weirdly, they invited all of us to come separately initially, and then to do our presentation all on the same day. And we were all staying in the same motel that was attached to a bowling alley, which is totally weird. So we go to the president's house and we all have dinner, and the conversation is quite polite and refined. And then we get back to the hotel and we go, okay, you guys, let's all just, rather than having them choose from amongst us, why don't we just bowl for the project? I mean, I was sure I would lose, but it still seemed like a great idea. But so we had a drink and then we didn't bowl. But it was fun. But Meryl came with, I've never seen her wear it since, a down coat that literally went from her ankles to, you know, her cheekbones. So I was impressed. I didn't know you had such gear here.
What's the reaction of some of these government employees working in very, very innovative buildings?
You know, it's quite interesting. We go back and check fairly frequently and talk to these people. The original port director at Warroad, the guy that suggested the log cabin actually left before we delivered the project. But the new guy he's just thrilled. He is so proud of his port. And Trish, the port director in Buren, Maine, is just thrilled. I mean, she was giving this tour, and I couldn't have done a better job. On the opening day, she was touring all of the representatives and all the people from Maine, and she was walking people around and telling the story of the design in a very articulate way. And I have to say, I would say that comes a lot from the GSA's peer review program, where, you know, you're inviting 3 peers in to discuss the project, and the client, literally, the end user and the client sits around the room on the perimeter and just listens to what a conversation about architecture sounds like. And it's really interesting. I mean, and so I think the director, the port director, a lot of the main people at the port get a very positive sense that what we're doing is really for them and on their behalf, because obviously security is huge, and it's something that we take very seriously. In fact, I was talking to, you know, Monica did a port in Madawaska, which had some of the same guys, and oh man, they just loved Monica. They thought she was terrific. I know she was here. And so she was saying it was so funny in her peer review. There were a couple peers that were really heavily critiquing her project. And they were having this sort of intense discussion. And afterwards, her clients came up to her and said, Monica, we just wanted to jump in and say how much we loved your building, and kind of protective of her. And she was saying, no, this is okay. This is what we do. This is how we improve our work, which I thought was really great. So I think, you know, our firm started doing projects, very pragmatic manufacturing projects, and I remember going, there was a bridge crane like what you guys have here in one of the projects, and I wanted to be able to put my photographer up there and have him shoot down. And so then we wanted to move it to get it in the shot right. So this guy came up and showed me how to operate the crane. And afterwards, when we were done with the shoot, I went over and I said, hey, you know, thank you so much for the lesson. I'll never forget it. I know how to drive now. And he said, well, thank you for the building. He said, it's been a joy to work here. And he said, we're expanding, we're growing. Can you do another one right next door? Which I thought was just, you know, this is not a guy that was in all the conversations, but he was just a guy that appreciated what we were doing and the sort of practical side of it, making your job easier. So we've had really great response from our clients. Of course, maybe they don't let us talk to the crabby people, I don't know. Yeah.
Yes, your last project was just fabulous. From a practical side, in working with your clients from the conceptual design, budget, construction schedule, and working all through that, maybe explain briefly how that is working in the environment that you were in.
That was actually an amazing project. The Van Buren Land Port of Entry was funded by American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which was absolutely crazy. So we had our notice to proceed in September, and the funds needed to be committed by June. And their RFP process takes 3 months in order to put out an RFP, receive proposals, select, and contract. So 3 months was actually, they would have preferred 6, but clearly that would have given us 2 months to design. And yet we still needed to go through the entire design excellence process, which means a first review showing 3 versions, and then a second review narrowing it down and developing 1, and then a CVP review, construction excellence reviews, as well as the final commissioner review. So that all occurred from September to March, and from March to April, well, I guess probably, yeah, early March. March and April, we did bridging documents that were then part of the design build contract. So it was for the government, and when we interviewed for the project, we said, okay, look, here's the requirement. In order to do this, I have to have National Customs and Border Protection and local Customs Border Protection in the same room. Because those guys are like ping pong. You know, you go to one guy, you ask him, and he says opposite of what the other guy says. So we were, you know, typically a government project takes 7 years. This was like 3 months. So it was intense, but we had a giant club. You know, if you don't figure this out, you're not gonna get a building. Your funds are gonna go away. So it was fantastic. It was a great working relationship. I would take that kind of funding any day. And then we were very fortunate to have a great contractor and Rob Siegel's office out of New York doing the documents for this. So it was very collaborative. And we did convince them that we would stay engaged throughout the design and construction. So we stayed involved all the way through, which was huge. This has not worked out so well with government design build projects. So this was considered a huge success for design build for them. It's kind of crazy. Yeah.
I have a question for you. I appreciated your description about research and design of these several things, and asking the why questions before you get on the how. And what I was curious is, do you make a formal presentation of the research to your clients before you show them anything about how you're going to do this? Or is that internal just for you, or do you actually have a?
Oh, we use it. Yeah, we use it. I mean, to me, that's, it's like the background. It's sort of the foundation of the thinking. So it's always seen. We don't always show it before clients see something, because they go, really, is this all you've been doing? I know, really? So it's really important, but we do show it at great length to introduce our first designs. Yeah, so sometimes it's quite different. It's a very interesting, the conditions of the project really dictate how the research goes. And design research is not typical, I mean, it's not like university research. So it's a different thing.